Hey there, welcome to the Big Box PC Game Collectors Podcast. I'm Joel, and this is Dan.
I'm Dan. This is Joel.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we wanted to talk about reproduction game boxes and the many forms that they may take and why they're frowned upon in the collecting community.
So if you reproduce a game box for pretty much any purpose, what is the point of collecting big box PC games at all? Just so that you don't have to spend the money on the real thing, or just because you've looked for it a long time, or is it because you are eventually going to resell these, hoping somebody kind of accidentally doesn't realize that they're not legit boxes that you've created?
I mean, that's the thing. Collecting, by its very nature, is not a manufacturing process. Our hobby is to attain things that already exist, not to create things that don't. So if you can't get a hold of a registered box copy of Doom, for example, because it's too expensive or it's too hard to
Mail
find,
or something like that. Commander Keen, one of these.
yeah, super expensive, super rare. Making one isn't a collectible process.
It's not an alternative to collecting the big box. At that point, you're better off just saying, okay, well, let me buy some discs. Let me grab the manual if I can, and just, figure out a way to display those if you really want them. And if you really are determined enough, and that's what you feel like one of your crown jewels of your collection will be, well, then save up and just buy them. Because if we're getting serious about talking about big box games, we're still kind of small fry when you talk to people that are like car collectors, for example, right?
Or even something like shoe collectors. I don't know if you've seen those guys.
Sneaker collectors. Yeah, there's $300,000 pairs of sneakers. We don't really have anything that's that expensive that I'm aware of in our hobby.
Mm-mm.
So it's attainable. It's really not like you're saying, well, this is Commander Keen, it's $1,000, $1,500, whatever it is. You can get that money and spend it. I understand not wanting to spend that kind of money, because I certainly don't on games that are that expensive. But at the same time, I'm not going to reproduce a box to stick it on my shelf. I might, if I can, find something uncommon. I actually earlier this morning saw on eBay the EGA release of Maniac Mansion, and that was selling as a box only. And I would consider something like that, because that's cool. That's stick that on my shelf. I don't have the rest of the game, but I paid a lot less than what most people are asking, even for the EGA version. And it's a legit piece of history, as opposed to me going and trying to recreate it. Now, we could also talk briefly about somebody like games like Ion Fury or Planet X3, where they're making their own game box, but they've actually made their own game, which I think is totally legit and totally acceptable.
There's also a gray area on something like a few years ago, there was a Warcraft Adventures
Yep.
box that was released. It was like a repro box. But it's not even really a repro because there was never one produced in the first place.
Well, the game wasn't even released, was it?
No, it was canceled. So it's just like a bootleg, I guess is a better word for it.
Yeah. So and you could argue, like a vinyl collector, for instance, would argue about the necessity and the legitimacy of a bootleg recording, but it's still at best a gray area for me. In my personal career, a lot of what I do is working with intellectual property and music, and there's really no gray area when it comes to me contracting with a company or an artist or something like that. There's no gray area. Like, the copyrights are either split, the IP is split, or somebody's bought out the copyright and the IP exclusively. So whoever's the IP holder for these art images or for the source code or for the game itself, like you can't just reproduce that without consequences or without, thinking about, well, you know what, we might take somebody's job. Literally in my industry, in the year 2000 or 2001 was the peak of CD sales, physical CD sales. And it's literally like, I think in 2019, it was around 5% of what it was 20 years before. So that was piracy. And I consider reproducing stuff piracy. And you could say, well, this game was never released and but it's still someone else's intellectual property. Just to say Warcraft, well, that's refers to a giant franchise, which is still very much in existence. I can see why Blizzard may choose not to go after somebody who released 200 copies of the Warcraft adventures, but it technically is a bootleg or piracy.
Yeah, there's no gray area on the illegality of it. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I don't understand. We certainly can't condone something like that in a group like ours that we have. But even me personally, I wouldn't. I I don't understand why it's something that you would want to promote and sell. Take it even a step further, like somebody using emulators to play games, right? You have all the ROMs, and it's kind of similar in a way, except I mean, I guess people do sell ROMs, but they're not really very difficult to go find if you're looking for them. Whereas a box itself, a PC game box that's been reproduced, especially something that's been well reproduced, to the average person is not really going to be identifiable. You and I might say, this is totally wrong. This isn't the right paper, but we've seen it sadly in just the Facebook group enough times to where it's been a legitimate concern, and there are enough people asking about how to do it and enough people showing off what they've done that it's definitely a disturbing trend in my
I mean, it's telling that they're not asking how to reproduce like big game hunter boxes, right?
right.
Like, the ones they want to make are Doom mail order, all these games that are super expensive, like Commander Keen, like you said. So,
Well, and we've seen reproductions of really really rare games too, like it's there was a Scott Adams game, I think, that we had seen. You could see the photocopy of somebody else's. The damage was photocopied in the picture. What
oh
we
yeah, I would say a solid 1 out of 3, like baggy games, like original Ultima ones that I see are reproductions of some kind, probably.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can own that game in terms of you can buy the Ultima Collection, which is relatively cheap, maybe $40 or $50. There's a Calibeth included in it. In fact, on GOG.com, a Calibeth is literally available for a free download. So if you want to play the game, if your excuse is you want to play the game, it's there. You can play it without any restrictions, whatever. And the Ultima games are all available and playable through various means. If you really want that game, let's say Mount Drash, right, which is really hard to obtain, just
Yeah.
save up, do something different with your financial situation. Get another job if you want. If it's really something that's that important to you, you can make it happen. It's much better than saying, I'm going to make this, and then you know what, I'll sell a few, offset my costs by selling a couple to people. Like that's just so.
I can't even put myself in the mindset of the person who would put this on the shelf. So I get a lot of enjoyment out of taking these games down, looking through the contents, opening them up, reliving an artifact from my childhood or my teenage years or whatever. Like the experience of doing that with something that I built isn't going to be the same. I mean, you're basically living a lie at that point, you know. And then if, let's say, your friend comes over and he asks about what these cool games are that are on your shelf, and you pull this thing down and you've built it, but it's not original, so you're just pulling the wool over people's eyes. Like, as a collector, that mindset doesn't even make sense to me.
It shouldn't really exist in what we're doing. I mean, we're the literal point of collecting is the pursuit of some games, especially ones that are very difficult to obtain, or nearly impossible to obtain. Like our friend Enrico is always after games that are seemingly impossible to obtain.
Yeah, and he puts the work in, you know.
He put the work in, and in many cases, he scrimped and saved and put the money up to buy them. You
Yeah,
know, with people knowing what they were valued at or what they were worth. It's just not something that I get it, especially if you got a game and you're like, oh well, I wish it was in better condition and this and that and the other. But the reality is, you're then not collecting. You're simply becoming reproducing. What are you? You're like a manufacturer of fakes, essentially. You're no better than somebody that's selling fake Rolexes in Times Square, or fake Gucci bags, or Louis Vuitton bags, or whatever. It's the same kind of thing to me.
yeah. And what kind of goes hand in hand with this particular topic is something that's, I think, even more prevalent than recreating the actual boxes, which is recreating the seals of the shrink wrap. Reshrinking is what we call it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we talk about being everywhere. Then there's a lot more reasons why people would do this. Most of the reseals that you encounter out and about were actually done by retail stores. Back in the day when they would get a return, they would reseal it using a reshrinker that they had there at the store and put it back on the shelf. So not even all the reseals you encounter are going to be like nefarious necessarily. But I've also seen other people who want to reshrink their games for, quote, protection, unquote, which is a horrible idea. Shrink wrap is not going to protect anything. It's actually going to actively damage the box. And then, of course, there's people who reseal them trying to increase the value so they can sell them. I can't
We've
really.
seen that firsthand for certain.
Yeah, there's been people in the Facebook group who have tried to do this for profit.
And
And
have sold, traded and or sold extremely, I would say, not rare games, but rare to have them sealed, to even people like the creator of the original game, and trying to pass off a fake to them. And then, of course, that didn't work out. And that's part of the reason that they were exposed. But yeah, let's talk about on the positive side of this. As you said, reshrinking or shrink wrapping, resealing your game is really no way to protect it if you're going
no,
to talk about game protection. One thing, actually, two ideas that I got, and I think they both came from Kevin, was to use comic book or magazine storage bags, because
yeah,
those are literally built to protect things like paper, photographs, and they don't have whatever contents in them that are potentially damaging and harmful to your boxes. So you can stick those around the games, you can tape them up, you can put a little bit of desiccant or forget what they call it, silica, is it
oh,
silica
those little,
gel bag?
yeah, those little things that eat up the moisture.
Yeah, if you're worried about moisture, you can add that into the box. And even one of the magazine bags, they're not exactly sealed, but you can kind of tape them up so they look very nice. Occasionally people see the games on my shelf and they say, oh, that seal is, no, it's just a magazine bag, there for protection because the game's in really good condition, or I don't want it to get worse or whatever. So that's one way. And then another, there's the comic book bags with the boards that I've actually been using. I think this is also Kevin's suggestion, to protect hint books.
Oh yeah,
A lot of times clue books and hint books came separately. So if you want to protect those, that's a nice way to do it. And then it's also easy to kind of go through and see what you have. And those methods to me are very useful and helpful ways of protecting your games. If you really want to go out on a limb, you can buy those they're like the plastic things that the grading services use. I'm not even sure what they're called.
yeah. I don't. We just call them slabs, but
Slab.
yeah, I don't know what the acrylic
Acrylic.
cases.
Yeah, acrylic. You can really go out on a thing and buy those if you want. You don't need to get them graded to get those slabs. They're much cheaper to not get them graded and just buy the slabs themselves.
Yeah, I would only invest in something like that if I had like a, a drash or something. Yeah, if you want the ultimate protection for something that's just completely rare, that's a good idea.
And look, I get it. Drash, there's what, uh,
A handful.
14 or 15 worldwide known copies or something like that.
Yeah.
So I get it. That one might be rough to try to attain, but I know Eric did sell his a year or two ago, so it was for sale at some point. They will come up for sale. You just have to be ready to engage and spend the money because they're not certainly not cheap. But I would think those are probably about as expensive as it gets for our hobby, and still talking about other things like even Nintendo NES games and things like that. Those are potentially a lot more expensive. You're not getting a sealed copy of stadium events for any kind of cheap money, or even some of the Neo Geo AES titles, and a lot of those have gone up in value, I guess, recently.
Man, I bet the Nintendo folks are having serious problems with box reproductions because
Oh, there's a huge problem with it.
those
Huge.
Nintendo boxes are so much easier to manufacture.
Well, they're
Um,
standardized. The size
yeah,
is standardized.
yeah,
So I've seen plenty of people selling fakes and reproductions on eBay, even though it's against eBay's terms of service. But it is something that's much more common. And sometimes what happens there is they'll actually write reproduction on the box.
yeah.
But to me, again, it's still the same thing. You might as well just buy those bit boxes or something like that and just stick them in a piece of plastic because that.
I can say at the very least that's at least less shady to communicate to someone that it's not. I just don't understand the appeal of wanting to get one.
I don't either. I don't collect console like I once did, but when I was collecting console, I was buying complete in box NES, and I was particular about having the right correct manual and the correct cart in the correct box because there's variants. Of course, when I started collecting PC more and more, the variants are kind of out of control. There's so many variants, and some single, one game might have 20 plus variants, whereas
It's almost impossible to keep up with.
yeah, and actually I think it is impossible, especially with Sierra games. And I think you can listen to some of the previous podcasts and understand about what's going on there. They can't even catalog all the variants, and sometimes they aren't even proper variants. They're just Sierra ran out of blue discs, so they use white discs. Sierra ran out of white discs, so they used, gray discs or whatever it was. Uh, they would just use what was there. I guess Ken Williams was a master of just saying, okay, we're not going to lose money on this. We're going to just use what we have,
Oh yeah,
more money, you know. That's why they were successful, because of things like that.
yeah, and you got to remember that their business wasn't producing things that were meant for collectability. Well, now with collector's editions, I think that game makers have basically caught on, but the basic function of these things are selling is to play the games. See, I doubt Sierra Online or Origin or any of those folks would have ever in their wildest dreams thought that people would be actively collecting this stuff and selling it for a lot of money.
I very
So,
much doubt it. And even with a collector that would be really recognizable, like John Romero, I don't even think back when he was starting, his career in the late 70s, early 80s, he did keep all of his stuff, but I don't think that he kept specifically boxes and editions of various games that they'd released over the years. He may have some of it. I believe he has all the things like the source code and design documents, which he would be the only person that would have possession of something like that. But certainly not all the boxes and every edition of Wolfenstein. I mean, how could you even keep up with that? There's so many localized releases and different ports with Doom and Wolfenstein that it's just unfathomable to be able to keep up with all that. Not just PC, but all the different ports those games got.
it's pretty exciting. They're talking about putting that museum together. I hope to be able to make it over there one day
Well,
to
the
check that
museum
out.
is together, and currently they have the space. But I think the decision now is, how's this going to work? When is this going to happen going forward? Because
Yeah.
originally it was supposed to open, I think, at the end of this. Well, it was supposed to happen sometime this year, but I know since their game is shipping Empire of Sin, it was going to be originally delayed before, obviously, all the other chaos with the pandemic that's been created. So your guess is as good as mine there, but I'm sure they'll keep us posted.
All right. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. Thanks for listening, folks. We hope to do this a little more often these days with the quarantine and everything. We have a lot more free time, so I'm going to try to get a lot more of this kind of stuff out. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.